Hello and welcome to this BB Education cutting tutorial. Today we're looking at a classic haircut, an A-line bob with layers. Whilst this haircut is very simple, it was always the haircut that left me feeling the most indecisive. I could never really understand how and why I did the layers, and I was always struggling to decide on where I would start. So today's tutorial is going to help with that. Now, let's look at what I'm doing here. You see I'm using the comb as a ruler and I'm cutting only a small amount of hair at once. But let's go back through that all again. So the first thing I do, if you notice, is my scissors went in first. They go underneath the hair and grab all of the hair. Okay, so that's it. It's lifting all the hair off the skin. Then my comb is coming over the top. And this is now where I'm going to lock all the hair into the comb using my scissors. Now the comb is used as a ruler and it's sitting flat horizontal. The comb is not being tilted, it's just sitting flat. Now you'll notice I'm tapping above the comb. Why is this? One is to loosen the tension, but two is to lower the elevation back down to zero elevation through the comb. Now I only cut a small amount. This is because I cut the distance between each eye. This means I can correctly gauge if I'm going straight or if I'm rounding up or rounding down in that distance. Any greater than that and I can't really tell. Then I'm working square to each section, which is why the elevation's changed. You can see a different part of the mannequin as I'm stood in a different perspective. Our line needs to be going on a slight forward diagonal. So if you're cutting, make sure you're assessing that. If our line starts to drift towards the horizontal, we're going to end up going shorter towards the front when the head is brought upright. We're going to continue the other side in exactly the same way, and this will give us our baseline, which will be used as a guide for the rest of the haircut. Remember, we've cut all this on a zero elevation through the comb. We've used no over direction, that's no side to side. Once we've completed it, we can take our next sections, which are working parallel to the sections we've just cut. Once we've completed these sections, the next section would end up going from the back straight into the front. But I'm going to share with you a really good tip to use on the salon floor, not only to get a really accurate result straight away, but also for time. So instead of taking the sections on a forward diagonal as you have been, we're going to start from the top of the parting, coming down in a curved diagonal section, then taking a flat forward diagonal section in the back. That all sounds dead complicated, so let's go through it again. The forward diagonal is from the back to just behind the ear. The curved section meets that from the top of the parting to just behind the ear. This means our next section is huge. We've got loads of hair from the front and we've got the hair from the back. But you see, that's the strength of the section. It means that the most difficult areas to cut are generally the front because the irregularity of the hairline around the recession makes life more difficult. Also the fact that the zones are different. From the mastoid process to the corner of the recession of the hairline, we've got hardly any hair. So we've gone from having this huge section with loads of guideline to another section that has hardly any guideline, if any. So we're going to start this at the centre nape, working forward. But let's go through that again. Here you'll see I have lots of hair to work with. I've got a good healthy guideline. Now as I work into the front, I've got no guideline. So I'm relying on the hair from the back as a guide. This should all be cut in an A-line shape. A-line is a reference, meaning that we don't cut a square line. This could be anything that isn't square. So when we come to cut our line, we have to consider the fact, one, we don't have a guide, but two, there's the ear. So as you can see here, as I just pull the hair over, yeah, fair enough, I am applying more tension. But you get the idea, the ear is interrupting the line. And if we just cut without considering that, we're going to end up with a hole around the ear, where as the hair's being stretched, when we release the tension, we're going to have an issue. So let's get to the point. How do we cut around the ear? You notice here I'm using the actual scissors to help me keep tension on the hair and keep the hair in the comb. When I work without it, I tend to find I don't always get all of the hair gripped in the same level of tension, and I don't have the same amount of control. When I use the scissor, it really helps. And then notice what I'm doing now. I'm tapping 3 times. Once and above the ear, once below the ear, and once above the comb. So tapping above the ear and below the ear is about the tension. But when I tapped above the comb, that was about lowering the elevation back to 0 through the comb. Now here we go again, we're tapping. Our comb is parallel to the jawline, and we're just cutting with this very slight drawing back motion to ensure we have control of our line. So here we have our A line, working parallel to the jaw. Remember, your comb is a ruler, so try to make sure that you always assess if you're correct or not by looking at where your comb is pointing. If your comb is pointing horizontal, you're going to go too short. So we're going to pull our section out, but where do we start from? We're using the length as a guideline, but we could use a length from really low down or really high up. By working low, as shown here, you'll see how much shorter the hair is, how much shorter the guide is. It's going to be more impactful the lower we place our guide. The higher we choose to place our guide, you can see a lot less hair comes off and the guide is much longer. So the more subtle you want the effect to be, take your guideline from a higher position. If you don't want too many layers, start high. If you want quite a dramatic effect, start low. I'm starting from the occipital bone, and I'm taking my sections vertically square, which is going to slowly increase the length, traveling vertical. So here we have our first section, which is vertically square. Now let's talk about the other direction. We've got our first section. We're going to take all our sections parallel with a vertical, and they're going to be over directed back onto previous. This means our horizontal shape will also be square, which is going to slowly increase the length to the mastodoid process. This means the guideline that we take for the front will be longer than the middle section that we first started with. This is significant. So our section here, which is section 2, is being over directed onto the base of section 1. Once this is complete, we will continue by removing the previous section, which is section 1, as shown here, and taking section 3. This means we only now have section 2 and section 3. We're going to work through this same process throughout both sides. We can now start the other side by reforming section 1, getting a new section 2. The only difference is your body must stay in the same position, but on the first side we cut, we were pulling onto the previous. Now we're pushing our sections onto the previous. By keeping the body position the same, we are able to keep consistency, and this will help us to keep our balance. As we complete, we're going to start the side. We're going to take a large vertical section. This is going to be our guideline or our new section 1 for all of the sides. But now we're going to have all of our subsequent sections from the side be over directed to the same guideline. So here we have section 2 going to our new section 1, which is the final section from our back zone. We're going to take section 3, 4, 5, however many sections are in this zone, will all be over directed back to the same guide. Do you know which shape we're now using? That's right, we're working triangular. So we've switched from working horizontally square, which gave us a slow increase of length, into triangular, which gives us a rapid increase. Do you know why we're doing this? It's because of the zones of the hair. Working past the mastodoid process into the front, there's so much less hair there. We want a consistent result and we don't want the front to look too thin. So we're going to be over directing everything back to the same guide, so we rapidly increase the length, opposed to the back where we slowly increased it. This will equalise the effects of our layers throughout all the zones of the hair, giving us a nice balanced result. The main reasons why people get holes in their length, especially behind the ear, is because they don't section to the mastodoid and they section to the radial. By the time they hit the radial section, the damage is done because there was so much less hair working past the mastodoid than there is working to the radial. So if you just immediately change that, use the radial section instead of the mastodoid, it will really help us to maintain a consistent result. Across the top, we're going to take a vertical profile section and we're going to pull this section straight up and cut it vertically triangular. Now, we've got our baseline here. The lower you take a guide from your base, the more hair will come off the top. So if you want it to be quite subtle, you can take your guide from a much higher position. I've taken the guide here from a very low position, as I want this tutorial to show you a more impactful end result. Once complete, we can see our end result. Now we need to begin with the fringe. So we're just going to take the fringe away. If the fringe is dried, you might need to remist it. I'm going to separate the fringe into two down the middle. I'm then going to separate them horizontally, or well, really on a 4 diagonal, working parallel to the hairline. This is because we don't want too much hair to work with at once. It's going to be easier to work with if there's a smaller amount of hair. I'm also going to remove some hair so I can start to check for the suitability for our client. So the first thing we do is just going to work through the comb with low tension and just cut some of the hair away. I must stress, this is purely because I think we can check the form better if there's less hair. We can visually see how it will suit the client once we establish a longer fringe. So this is a good tip if you're doing a fringe on a client who's never had one before. Cut the hair to the nose or the mid-nose, and then you'll start to see through the mirror which length will suit her. We're starting in the centre, working with through the comb in the same way we cut the length, very low tension, and we're just cutting a very slight curved section. So that means we're almost using the eye socket as a guideline for whilst we cut over the eye. This helps to compensate for as the hair will undoubtedly jump when we take away the comb. Once complete, we have our baseline. So we can bring in the next section and cut this to the baseline. We're cutting this with a zero elevation through the comb. Remember, the scissors are only there to hold the hair still and to give us control. This technique is great, especially if there's a car flick or if the client has a lot of hair growth patterns. If they really do, use the wide part of your comb to give less tension, allow the roots to pull away, and then we can assess our work. And here we have our blow dried end result without any refining and without any texturizing. That's why working to a natural fall and trying not to disturb the hair is key to getting a perfect sharp fringe. We've cut this to an eye length, allowing for a softer feel to a structured shape. One of my final ways of checking a shape is to work the hair through the mirror without any product in. If the hair moves and sits how I want without product, I know the shape is finished. This completes today's tutorial. Today's tutorial was a classic A-line bob with a fringe and layers. We really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. We want to thank you for watching and we hope to see you again soon.